In 1990, EDF was the world's #1 electricity company, with the largest nuclear fleet in Europe, the cheapest electricity on the continent, 150,000 employees, and a presence in 30 countries. 30 years later, in 2022, the same company recorded losses of 17.9 billion euros, the worst loss in the history of a French company. Yet no manager made any strategic mistakes, no engineer sabotaged a reactor, and no competitor invented a revolutionary technology. The crime came from elsewhere. What happened at EDF is not an isolated accident. It's a mechanism. Theorized as early as 1971 by the American economist George Stigler, who won the Nobel Prize in Economics in 1982 for his work on this phenomenon he called regulatory capture. The principle is simple. A state uses the law to transfer wealth from one of its own companies to its competitors under the guise of stimulating competition. And once you understand how it works, you'll start seeing it everywhere.
The CLCV Association claims that in 10 years, prices have increased by 50%, and today the average household pays 1,520 euros per year.
Hi, Entrepreneur Mindset. I hope you're doing well. Today we're tackling a government scandal, a French industrial champion that was forced to sell its electricity at a loss to its own competitors for 15 years. And this was at the expense of the French people. An organized sabotage in broad daylight, approved by Brussels, carried out by France, and paid for by you. Our story begins in October 1973 in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. The Arab oil ministers meet behind closed doors, and within a few days they decide to shut off the flow of black gold. This will multiply the price of a barrel by 4 in just a few months. In Paris, Pierre Mesmer instantly grasps what is at stake. France imports 75% of its energy. Gas stations are mobbed, industry slows down, and the prime minister then makes a decision that will change the fate of the country. In March 1974, he launched the most ambitious plan in French industrial history to build 56 nuclear reactors in 15 years to make France energy independent.
They made the decision in 1974 and 1975 to begin building 13 nuclear power plants.
The gamble is crazy because EDF engineers have to build in less than 20 years what most countries take a century to construct. And yet they do it. In 1990, France had the most powerful civilian nuclear fleet in the world after the United States. One distinctive feature: this fleet is entirely public, controlled by a single company, EDF. And the consequences are spectacular, because French electricity becomes the cheapest in Europe, with the French paying up to 40% less per kilowatt hour than their German neighbors. The country's heavy industries, aluminum, steel, chemicals, and metallurgy, can remain competitive thanks to this cheap electricity. And when the world started talking about global warming in the 2000s, France already had the most decarbonized electricity in Europe, because nuclear power produces almost no CO2. EDF became untouchable, the world's leading producer of nuclear electricity, present in more than 30 countries, employing 150,000 people, and valued at several tens of millions. A French industrial giant like we hadn't seen in decades. Everything is going perfectly in the best of all worlds for the energy champion. But hundreds of kilometers from Paris, in the offices of the European Commission in Brussels, this power is starting to seriously cause concern. In their eyes, EDF is not an industrial flagship to be protected, but a state monopoly that prevents free and fair competition. And it is exactly at this moment, while EDF is at the height of its power and no one in France suspects anything, that a trap begins to be set silently. One man will see it coming years before anyone else, will do everything to stop it, and will be fired for it. That man is Proglio. In 2007, the French electricity market officially opens to competition. Total, Engie, Eni, and other European giants rush into France to offer their deals to consumers, convinced that they will quickly take market share from the incumbent utility. Except that they discover a harsh reality. EDF produces its electricity at a cost that no private company can match, so no one subscribes to their offers. The rival suppliers are going to cry foul about unfair competition, and Brussels listens with particular attention. That's where our story gets completely crazy. Rather than telling private competitors to build power plants, invest and take risks before discussing competition, France just gives them an unreasonable gift. It allows them to buy electricity from EDF at cost price to resell it to the French with a very healthy margin. The mechanism is called ARENH, which stands for Regulated Access to Historic Nuclear Electricity. And it was established by the NOM law of December 7, 2010 in direct application of a commitment made by France to the European Commission. Specifically, the French government requires EDF to sell up to 100,000 TWn of its nuclear electricity each year to its competitors, which is about a quarter of its total production. And the price for this sale was set by decree at 42 euros per MW, starting in 2012. And this price did not change for more than 10 years. On paper, the government's argument is defensible because 42 euros is supposed to represent the cost of producing EDF's nuclear electricity. So the mechanism would be neutral for the company. Except the problem is that this price of 42 euros will never be revised, while all of EDF's costs are going to skyrocket. For 15 years, with the maintenance of aging reactors, the safety upgrades required after the Fukushima accident in 2011, and the massive investments to prepare the new EPR reactors. And so, while EDF's actual costs were mechanically rising, its selling price was forced to stay frozen. And that's where our dear Henry Proglio comes in.
Forced us to accept a law that made us subsidize the competition. We sell our nuclear power capacity, 25% of French nuclear power production, to our competitors at a price significantly lower than its production cost. He is appointed
CEO of EDF in November 2009, just before the ARENH was voted on. He is an old-school industrialist, tough, direct, and comes from the water and waste sector after having led Veolia for years. And he has a reputation for never giving up when he thinks he's right. When the NOM law is introduced, he instantly recognizes the trap, seeing what politicians ignore. This mechanism will eventually ruin EDF. He warns the government, Senate, and press, publicly stating that 42 euros is undervalued, costs will skyrocket, and we're barely holding on. Sacrifice the French industrial champion to please competitors who have never invested a single euro in production. But Proglio lacks the political clout to make Brussels back down, and the NOM law still passes in December 2010. He will continue to fight for the next 4 years, and he will become one of the fiercest opponents of the system within French capitalism itself. But in November 2014, at the end of his term, as you might expect, he is simply fired. François Hollande's government appoints Jean-Bernard Lévy in his place, a more agreeable CEO who won't make any waves, and Henri Proglio had just been proven right, except that no one wanted to hear it. For 10 years, the mechanism runs in general indifference, because electricity prices on European markets remain low, and EDF loses a bit of money on each MWh sold without the problem really being visible. But in 2022, everything will explode. And what will happen that year will reveal to everyone who the real winners are in this scam organized by the state. You paid 200 euros more on your electricity bill in 2022. Total Energy made 20.5 billion in profits that same year. Its best result ever. And that's not a coincidence. Total Engie Eni, you see these names everywhere on your bills, in ads and at gas stations. And they all took advantage of the same mechanism for 15 years to get rich at EDF's expense and yours. Total Energy, which bought Direct Energy in 2018 for 1.4 billion euros, now has an annual turnover of 200 billion. Engie, formerly GDF Suez, is worth more than 80 billion. And behind them, there are about 30 other players, like Eni, the Italian company, Sweden's Vattenfall, Mint Energy, or EcoWater. All these players have one thing in common that should catch your attention. They don't produce electricity in France, but they bought it from EDF at 42 euros and resold it to the French. For 10 years, this system operated relatively quietly because wholesale prices remained low, around 40 to 50 euros per megawatt hour. And the supplier's profit margin remained reasonable without being excessive. In fact, I was a Direct Energy customer myself, and I fell for Eni's promises, not knowing what was going on behind the scenes. But in 2021, everything went off the rails. Prices started to rise with the post-COVID recovery. And in 2022, the war in Ukraine triggered an unprecedented energy crisis that pushed the price up to 1,000 euros per megawatt hour, which is 25 times the ARENH price. And that's when the trap closed in on EDF. By law, it was required to keep selling its electricity at 42 euros to its competitors, while at the same time, it had to buy back electricity at high prices on the markets to make up for its deficit caused by shutting down 12 reactors due to corrosion. To put it simply, EDF sells at 42 euros what it has to buy back at 1,000 euros. As you know, Total Energy had the best year in its history in 2022. Engie reports record margins in its French division. But wait, the most ironic thing is Vattenfall, which is 100% owned by the Swedish state, is pocketing the profits from its French contracts while its own citizens continue to enjoy their public electricity at home. The French state forced its industrial champion to bleed in order to subsidize private competitors who absolutely didn't need it. And it's the French people who ended up paying the final bill both ways, as consumers with their skyrocketing bills, and as taxpayers with what's going to happen in the coming months. On February 17, 2023, Luc Raymond, the new head of EDF, steps onto the stage to announce the annual results with a serious expression. EDF has just reported 17.9 billion euros in losses for the year 2022, which is the worst loss in the history of a French company across all sectors, with financial debt reaching 64.5 billion euros. To give you an idea, that's more than what all the French companies in the CIC 40 combined lose in a year at their worst moment. 3 simultaneous disasters hit EDF that year. The ARENH, which you now know by heart, continues to drain its cash flow, as it has for the past 10 years, with the effect multiplied by skyrocketing wholesale prices. The price shield, which forces EDF to sell an additional 20 TWh to its competitors at a cost of 8 billion euros in 2022. And 12 nuclear reactors shut down due to corrosion problems, forcing EDF to buy back electricity at high prices. At this point, EDF is technically bankrupt, and the French government faces a choice it didn't see coming. Let its industrial champion go under or save it urgently. In July 2022, Elisabeth Borne, then Prime Minister under Emmanuel Macron, announced the 100% nationalization of EDF, and the state bought back the remaining 16% for 9.7 billion euros, financed, as you can imagine, with public money. So, your taxes. But that's not all. Now we come to the most cynical moment of this whole story. Because the French government didn't just pay to fix what it had itself broken over the past 15 years. It also passed the bill on to consumers, with an increase in the regulated tariff of more than 40% between 2022 and 2024, which is exactly what millions of French people experienced on their bills. And today, in 2026 now, that ARENH was abolished at the end of 2025 and replaced by a new mechanism at 70 euros per megawatt-hour contracts are much more volatile, and bills could continue to rise. Meanwhile, Total Energy, ENGIE, and the other beneficiaries of the old system continue to post record results because they had 15 years to build up a massive customer base in France thanks to EDF's electricity at cut-rate prices. And here you might remember what I told you in the introduction, that you would see this regulatory capture mechanism everywhere. Well, here are 3 examples that are going to blow your mind. You see it with Air France, which is forced to give up its slots at Roissy to foreign airlines, while the national carrier was collapsing and Ryanair came in to take advantage without having built any kind of hub. You also see it with SNCF, where the state split off the profitable activities for competitors while leaving the unprofitable ones with the public company, which basically amounts to privatizing the profits and nationalizing the losses. You also see this with La Poste, which had to provide universal service nationwide, while private competitors could focus only on profitable areas. That's what mathematically dooms the incumbent operator. That's the business lesson to take away from this story. When you build something that depends 100% on a single player for your survival, whether they're your main client, your exclusive supplier, or your regulator, you're no longer in control of your own destiny. EDF was destroyed because it depended on a single player who could change the rules of the game unilaterally. And this trap can close on any company, any employee, and any entrepreneur. A bit like SFR, which was bled dry in exactly the same way, literally gutted from the inside by a single man, Patrick Drahi, who turned a company worth 10 billion into a financial disaster for his own profit, as you can see in the video that's showing.